Hi all, I have another fascinating game to show you from the Gibraltar tournament 2018. Levon Aronian, who was the eventual winner, was playing against Sarah Hoolt in round 3. Let's have a look at this game and try and emphasise the instructive points. D4. Now Sarah Hoolt, to her credit, plays very aggressive Dutch defence F5. This isn't so popular nowadays. It's got a reputation of creating weaknesses, and the stronger the opponents that you play, the more those weaknesses are often picked out. Nevertheless, Magnus Carlsen's been playing the Dutch defence at a high level, so it can still be a useful fighting weapon. Now here, this is kind of an anti-Dutch system, avoiding the main lines, so with knight c3 and bishop g5. We see d5, not minding the prospect of the pawns being doubled. But in fact, actually here, white plays e3. It's interesting even just to double the pawns there. e6, knight f3, bishop e7, bishop d3, and now after knight e4, black is willing to trade off the defender of the dot squares, knowing that there's pawns on light squares. This is slightly suspect. Bishop takes e7, queen takes e7. This bishop on c8 is saying, please don't let me be the only last piece left in this prison of a pawn structure. So let's have a look at this bishop and this pawn structure here. After both sides castle, knight e2, c5, we have b3, which maybe c4 is sometimes useful for black, but also it does support c4, as we're going to see. After knight e7, c4, which in one way kind of undermines the knight, the entrenchment of the knight. But black actually didn't wait for c takes d5 here, which might be a concern. D takes c4, bishop takes c4, knight d6, queen c2, and this bishop's starting to get a bit more worried now after knight takes c4, because there's actually only two minor pieces, and that bishop's still in this kind of prison of its own pawn structure. Rook e8, knight f4, c takes, e takes, queen d6, and now maybe Levon Aronian wants to maximize the misery and suffering of the c8 bishop here. Can you guess what move he played if I give you 5 seconds starting from now to pause the video? And maybe he's also studied AlphaZero games as well, so what move would you play? Okay, knight e5, and now the bishop on c8 must be saying, what have you done? Why am I the only minor piece left? If you consider the rooks as major pieces, why am I the only minor piece left, and against the dreadful knight, which can attack different colours of squares when it hops around? So yeah, the poor c8 bishop now is a real problem piece after this pawn sacrifice. Rook fe1, queen f6, rook ad1. So yep, that bishop, what is going to happen with it? Queen f7. On b6, trying to put the bishop somewhere, this starts to get a little bit dangerous. For example, if we look at this forcing move continuation, there's little tricks with the back row, but say queen b4, this is a computer line I'm just showing you. It seems to, computers believe this is in white's favour. White controls that d file here, the knight's quite strong here. It's difficult for black to kind of do something constructive in this position. So this dart square grip is evident in these variations, but maybe b6 might be playable. Queen b5, a6, queen b6, that dart square grip shutting down that bishop here is evident. a5 as though rook a6, and there might be some life breathed into black's position. Knight d3, keeping a strong grip over that e5 dart square, the prison for the bishop. This pawn structure is restrained. Queen goes back here after rook a6, b5, queen c5. These dart square moves are like torture to black here. Queen b7, knight e5, dart square blockade against that pawn on e6, which is imprisoning the c8 bishop. The queen drops back here, keeping the queens on, because now actually the combination of the queen and knight is not just to torture the bishop, it's to try and get some action on the king side. And we see that now with queen g5, the queen lunging back to g5. Rook d3, as though the rook's going to help here with some sort of attack. Queen c7, queen drops back for a moment to e3. you might think this is a curious move, but it's a kind of wait and see move. What is black wanting to do here? The bishop is finally committed to b7, which looks like an impressive diagonal for it to have, but it's at some cost now, a tempo gaining on the queen and another tempo gain on the queen. So we see that queen d8 here that leads knight f6 maybe to win the queen. So the queen's tucked away on a8 here, but now that the queen's all kicked over to a8, now the queen and knight are like vultures coming together against the black king, queen g5. So yeah, the price of freedom of that bishop, it seems as though white's now creating kingside attacking tactics and opportunities. This can be demonstrated if we give a token move like a4, there's knight f6, winning not just the exchange with knight takes e8, but can you see another move which is even more crushing here? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay, queen g6 would be a crusher here. For example, takes, and we have that nice mate pattern. And if takes here, check, this rook c7 is going to end up winning the queen basically at this rate, because there's a nice tactic here. Can you spot it? 5 seconds. Rook takes g7, because if queen takes this, mate. So yeah, that would be disaster, a disaster. So that's the threat that has to be parried. Knight f6. Black tries king h8. Technically, it seems there is a move which might actually hold the position a lot longer, which is h6. For example, knight f6, king f7, and this should be okay, because there you take the queen, and if the queen is forced to go back, it should be okay. So that's an interesting possibility here. That h6 might have been the move for minimal damage, but we see the move king h8, and now after king h8, knight f6 here, this very strong tactical move in this position. In any case, if g takes, check, we still have that pattern where it ends up winning basically the queen, or material. Actually, in this case, material. Rook takes b7. That's just winning a hole. This is a fantastic position to have. Well, there's a big advantage there, winning material back there. So with interest. So here we have rook c8, rook cd1, rook f7. Now, actually, Levon played knight d7 here. It seems as though in this position that actually might be a neat tactic with knight takes as well. For example, like this is very dangerous. For example, here, this is a computer line, of course, and black would have to give up the queen because otherwise there's a checkmate here. So this would be in white's favour, this whole line. Rook d8. So yeah, it seems as though knight takes h7 was good as well as the game continuation. Rook g8, it serves to demonstrate actually the knight and queen are pretty lethal here. Even though the bishop's seeing the light of day, it's not in a total prison. It's the king now which is in grave danger. After rook h3, there's an immediate threat here, which I'm pretty sure you can guess if I give you a token move. What would you play here? Okay, rook takes is just mating there, so that has to be addressed pretty urgently. So here it's h6. Now Levon plays in this position knight e5. That pawn is of course pinned, so knight e5, rook f6, and now very, very neat tactic. If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play in this position? Okay, very well calculated tactic. Rook takes h6. Now if g takes, that's clearly not doing black any favours here, this position, because we have, for example, this winning everything. Is if king h7, then there's queen takes. So that's not doing black any favours. So rook takes, check, and now knight takes h6, and it's pretty hopeless for black here. If g takes, then there's this check here which is going to be mating. So black tries bishop f3, which is pretty hopeless actually, because now there's knight f7. And this rook is immune. Black played rook f8. If bishop takes d1, there would be check, and now after king g6, knight e5 is actually checkmate, believe it or not. So yeah, black gives space for the king, that g8 square, but now queen h4 check, and black has to resign. The game ended here. If king g6, we're back to this knight e5 being checkmate, and if king g8, then there's a double attack with, can you guess? If I give you 5 seconds, what would you play here? Knight g5, yeah, threatening queen h7 check, as well as the bishop, so that would be just winning the bishop, basically. If black tries to, by the way, tap into, yeah, it's just a hopeless position. Just losing a bishop there, being a piece down. So yeah, the game ended here after queen h4 check. So this was a kind of game which was about the c8 bishop doing a pawn sack. The bishop's worst nightmare came true, and it's as if finally, when the bishop did seem to have a nice diagonal, the king started to be having grave concerns instead. So it was going from the frying pan into the fire, basically, this game. First it was the c8 bishop, and then it was the king himself in grave danger, and it was very difficult to defend that. So a very, very interesting dynamic game from Levon Aronian. A bit of a fun spoiler for the daring to create weaknesses. That's what sometimes happens. The weaknesses, it's not just the dark squares, it's the imprisonment of the bishop. So sometimes that happens, and that was a common strategy for the Alpha Zero match against Rybka. This c8 bishop was often tortured. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares, appreciated. Thanks very much.